Diets designed to take inches off the waistline could potentially end up taking years off someone's life. That's according to researchers in America who suggest cutting down on carbohydrates in foods like pasta and bread may reduce life expectancy by up to 4 years. Some clarity. We're joined by consultant cardiologist and advisor to the National Obesity Forum, Dr. Aseem Malhotra. I'm confused. I'm so confused. We get so many different messages. This latest message is that cutting out carbs is actually damaging for you. I know that you are an advocate of low sugar diets, but what do you make of this particular research?
So, Kasia, I think there's a nuance here, but the first thing to say is, as a clinician, as a doctor who's treated tens of thousands of patients, as someone who has a responsibility to scientific integrity, to someone that's analysed this research in detail, over the years about what constitutes the healthiest diet, this headline claim that suggests that eating a low-carb diet shortens lifespan is completely and totally false. Any suggestion that it does is, I would describe as a miscarriage of science. Now, one of the reasons for that is this type of study is what we call an observational study. There are so many flaws with this, you can't draw cause and effect. But what I can tell you is that with any of these studies, you have to look at it in the context of the overall totality of evidence and data, up-to-date data. And what we know, certainly for type 2 diabetes, and we have thousands of people in the UK now who are benefiting from going on a low carbohydrate diet, who are managing to even reverse their type 2 diabetes. Diabetes.co.uk, an independent organisation, have shown that with at least 25% of their patients. More than 60% of these people are coming off, reducing medication needs as well. And from a heart disease perspective, I think what we need to understand is the underlying process behind many of these chronic diseases that we're having to deal with, obesity, type 2 diabetes, heart disease. It's based upon a biological mechanism that's linked to something called insulin resistance and chronic inflammation. Now, what should the public read from all of this? I said today, and I wrote in the newspaper, that actually the message should be eat real food. Most of our consumption of harmful foods actually is coming from processed carbohydrates and sugar. Half of the British diet is now ultra-processed food, and it's made up from these foods. So the starchy carbohydrates at the base of the diet, I think, is completely wrong. In fact, for type 2 diabetics in particular, and this is the condition with the single biggest cost on the NHS, putting a base of your diet with starchy carbohydrates is the worst thing you can do for blood glucose. Now, in terms of lifespan, we know that this study cannot show this whatsoever. And what's interesting as well...
You say that categorically, but this is, okay, it's an observational study, but it was a large amount of people over, and it's published in The Lancet. One would expect it to have been researched. There has to be some kind of element of truth in this.
Yeah, well, no, I think there is a nuance, and there is some good stuff in there. But just to answer your question directly, Kasia, and Lancet is a very prestigious journal. Last year, they published a much larger study across the world called the PURE study, which was the most extensive, much larger than this, study looking at the relationship between carbohydrates, fats, and health. And what did that conclude? It concluded that a high carbohydrate diet was linked with increase in death rates, and interestingly, high saturated fat within that study was actually linked to less death rates from reduction in risk of stroke. Now, let's cut through all of this. What should we be eating? I think that's the most important message to people.
Exactly. So they cut through all of this for us. So not processed, not too much sugar.
So lots of vegetables. I would say reduce your starchy carbohydrates. Have a little bit if you're exercising regularly. That's fine. But modern processed carbohydrates, too much white bread, pasta, sugar, too much white rice is harmful in excess. There's no doubt about that. So I would say lots of vegetables, oily fish, extra virgin olive oil, a handful of nuts every day, and cut out the sugar and the processed foods. And if you do that, you're really on your way to the best health and the best longevity.
It's an expensive option though, isn't it?
Well, not necessarily. I mean, this has been posed to me before. An apple is cheaper than a Mars bar. So actually you can follow a healthy dietary pattern. The problem we've got is a lot of these ultra-processed foods are very cheap sugary foods, processed carbs, are very heavily marketed and they become unavoidable. Wherever you go, Kasia, now, it's almost impossible to avoid, cakes, chocolates, crisps, biscuits. Even our hospitals have become a branding opportunity for the junk food industry. So really what we need to do on the overall grand scheme of things to reduce these epidemics of chronic disease is we need government intervention that improves the food environment, and we all need to be eating more home-cooked food. And if we do that, then actually we can go back to levels of obesity and type 2 diabetes pre-1980s, where there was virtually very little in England.
So basically, be sensible. Other chocolate bars are available. I just want to stress that. Dr. Malhotra, thank you very much for talking us through what we should be eating. It's common sense, but it's not easy, is it? Sometimes you do want a bit of chocolate. Thank you so much for coming in to speak to us.